Hi, Master John Madden in Nashville, North Carolina. I'm in the beautiful Grove Arcade, which is wonderfully decked out for Christmas on the 4th of December. I just made a video about the niceties of negotiating your cigarette smoking with your neighbors. I'll put a link to that. But it brought up the bigger issue of to what extent does the government mess with things like cigarette smoking. There is a huge difference between the U.S. and Mexico. In Mexico, there's a very strongly held cultural position that translates as something like personal sovereignty, that the government does not unnecessarily mess with the rights of the individual. And it has to do especially with the way that laws are enforced. There are laws that are the same in both places but enforced differently. I just spent 2 years in Mexico, and a couple years before I got there, the federal government had passed a law outlawing cigarette smoking in restaurants. And the Restaurant Association had such a fit about that it got turned back within about a month or two. That did not sit at all. So now the proprietors get to decide. Things like, we assume in the U.S. that the government has a right to enforce seatbelts. Not so in Mexico. No. The law is the same, but I think it's probably safe to say that no cop is ever going to write a citation for seatbelts in Mexico. Cigarette smoking? In the U.S., the CDC, out of good intentions, decided that no longer could anybody sell loosies, single cigarettes, because it encourages smoking. What it does is it requires poor people who, by proportion, smoke a lot more, to have to buy a whole pack when often they can't afford that. In Mexico, almost any little tienda, any family-run tienda, is going to sell you loosies for 6 pesos or 10 pesos. Motorcycle and motor scooter riding. The law is the same in Mexico, that every rider must have a separate seat and separate toe pegs. Well, if you spend any time in Mexico, you know that's, except for maybe in big cities, that is so wildly not enforced. It's a real art form as to how many people and how many things you can get on a motor scooter, and they're very skilled. Those riders are very skilled. The drivers are skilled, the riders are skilled. They're liable to be not holding on, just doing their email on the back when they're riding along. Yeah, you'll see 2 adults and 2 children, 2 adults with a baby hanging off the mom's arms, 2 adults, 2 kids, and a ladder, or a young couple with a big floppy dog with their paws overhanging the handlebars. Yeah. So it's something that I like to say that the progressive left ought to give to the right, because the right is more correct. That Big Brother is messing with people's individual liberties too much in some of these areas. When we get into vaccinations and stuff like that, that's a whole different thing. But if Madeleine Warren and Bernie Sanders and Zoran Mamdani would say, yeah, you're right, we really need to look at that. Have we unconsciously slipped into an area where we assume the federal government ought to make calls that not their business? Just not their business. No.